You'd think that after 15 years of marriage and one heartbreak too many, a person would learn that trust, once broken, doesn't come back the same way. But love, or maybe habit, makes fools of us all. The day I handed Ethan that envelope, I thought I was doing the right thing. The divorce papers had been signed, the house sold, and the settlement divided fairly. I even wished him luck as I passed him the check, my share of what we'd built, what we'd broken, and what I was finally letting go of. He looked at me with those familiar eyes, soft and regretful. "You're a good woman, Mara," he said. "I don't deserve your kindness." I smiled, even though my throat felt tight. I believed him. But kindness, I've learned, can be the most expensive mistake of all. Before everything fell apart, we had what people called a comfortable life. A little house on Cedar Lane with blue shutters, 2 kids, Luke and Emma, and a garden full of marigolds. I used to love how the smell of them drifted through the kitchen window while I cooked. Ethan was a contractor. I was a school secretary. We weren't rich, but we had enough. Enough for date nights, birthdays, the occasional weekend trip to the coast. Enough to believe that stability was forever. He was funny, charming, the kind of man who could talk anyone into anything. At neighborhood barbecues, he'd flip burgers with one hand and hold court with the other, telling stories that made everyone laugh. I loved that about him, that brightness. But the brightness came with shadows I ignored for too long. The late nights that started as work deadlines, the new cologne I didn't buy him, the silence in our bed that grew heavier every night. At first, I blamed myself. I thought maybe I'd become too ordinary, the woman who packed lunches and paid bills but forgot how to flirt. I tried harder. New hair, nicer dresses, spontaneous dinners. He noticed, but only in passing. His eyes were always somewhere else. Then one night, while folding laundry, I found a receipt tucked into his jeans pocket. A hotel, 2 towns over, 1 room, 2 breakfasts. The kind of detail that doesn't lie. I didn't scream. I didn't throw things. I sat on the edge of our bed and stared at the marigold curtains swaying in the breeze, trying to remember when our life had turned into something I didn't recognize. When he came home, I showed him the receipt. He froze. Then he sighed. "It's not what you think." "It never is," I said quietly. We fought that night. The kind of argument that feels like a storm you can't outrun. By morning, the only thing left was silence, and the understanding that whatever we'd built was gone. The divorce took 6 months. We agreed to keep things civil for the kids. I kept the car, he kept his truck. We split the savings. I gave him a little extra from the house sale because he swore he was trying to start over, to find a new place near the kids. He promised, "I'll make things right, Mara. You'll see. I'll get my life together." I wanted to believe that. Not for him. For me. Because believing that people can change is easier than accepting that they won't. After he moved out, the house felt too big, too quiet. I threw myself into work, filled weekends with errands, coffee dates with friends, anything to avoid the emptiness. Luke and Emma adjusted better than I did. Kids are resilient that way. They loved their father, and I never stood in the way of that. Every other weekend, they stayed at his new apartment. When they came back, they'd tell me stories about Dad's cool place and his friend Jenna who bakes cookies. I didn't ask questions. I told myself Jenna was just a friend, maybe a coworker helping him settle. I didn't need to know more. Or at least, that's what I told myself. A year passed. My savings were tight, but I managed. I even started taking online classes in the evenings, thinking maybe I'd go back to school someday. Life was small, but peaceful. Then one evening, Emma came running into the kitchen, her phone in her hand, eyes wide open with excitement. "Mom, look, Dad's on Instagram." She showed me the screen. There he was, Ethan, standing in front of a sleek glass building, arm around a blonde woman in a white dress. The caption read, "New beginnings. Our dream home is finally complete." I froze. "Isn't it beautiful?" Emma said. "He said they're moving in this weekend." I forced a smile. "Yes, it's, very nice." But inside, something twisted hard. That building, I recognized it. It was a new apartment complex downtown, the kind of luxury development I knew he couldn't afford on his salary, the kind of place built with money. My money. That night, after the kids went to bed, I opened my laptop and started digging. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for, a real estate listing for the very same complex. Fully paid units available, starting at $380,000. I stared at the number until my vision blurred. The settlement I'd given him, it was almost the same amount. I checked his public posts again, photos of furniture being delivered, a custom kitchen, a brand new car in the driveway. Every image was a punch to the gut, each caption a reminder that he was living a life I'd unknowingly financed. There was even a photo of Jenna, the woman in the white dress, smiling on a balcony that overlooked the city. The balcony I'd helped pay for. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my reflection in the dark window. All I could think was, he didn't just move on. He built his new life with the money I gave him to start over. By morning, my sadness had hardened into something else. Quiet, steady anger. I wasn't going to let him get away with it. I printed the pictures, the listings, everything. I called my lawyer. He listened, sighed, and said, "Legally, Maura, it's complicated. Once a settlement is signed, how he uses it isn't our business. But it was supposed to be for him, to get stable, for the kids." "I know," he said gently, "but moral promises aren't binding contracts." I hung up, feeling both foolish and furious. I'd trusted him. Again. And he'd taken that trust and turned it into someone else's luxury. For a few days, I went through the motions. Work, dinner, dishes, bed. But something in me had shifted. You know that feeling when your heart hardens just a little? When you realize the softness that once defined you has been taken for weakness? That was me. Every time I saw Ethan's name light up on my phone, a text about the kid's schedule or a school form, my pulse quickened. But not from longing, from fury barely kept under control. I didn't want revenge, not really. What I wanted was acknowledgement, for him to see the damage he'd done, to understand that betrayal isn't always about bodies and beds. Sometimes it's about the quiet kind. The kind that drains your savings and your soul at the same time. Still, I didn't act right away. Instead, I watched. The next weekend, when Ethan came to pick up Luke and Emma, I studied him. He looked polished. Designer watch, crisp shirt, hair styled like he'd just stepped out of a salon. It was the look of a man who had finally found the life he always wanted. Except he hadn't built it himself. "Hey," he said, flashing that familiar half-smile. "Have you been?" "Fine," I said, keeping my voice even. He glanced around. "House looks good. You've done some redecorating?" I bit back the first response that came to mind. I had to sell half my furniture to pay for your dream home. Instead, I nodded. "A few changes. Keeps me busy." He smiled, oblivious. "That's good. Busy is good." Then he called out for the kids, and just like that, he was gone again, off to his polished world with his polished woman. When the door closed, I exhaled slowly, like I had been holding my breath for months. A few days later, I met my friend Tessa for coffee. She was one of those people who could sense when something was off. "Mara, you're quiet. What's going on?" I told her everything. The Instagram post, the apartment, the realization that my settlement had funded his new life. By the end, her jaw was clenched tight. "Unbelievable," she said. You give that man a second chance at stability, and he hands it to another woman on a silver platter? I nodded, blinking back tears. I feel stupid. Don't, she said sharply. You were generous. He was greedy. There's a difference. Her words sat with me the rest of the day. Generous, not stupid. Maybe that was true. But even generosity deserves boundaries. That night, I went back online. I looked deeper. Not out of obsession, but purpose. I found the company that built the apartment complex. Under project manager, there it was, Ethan Collins. So that was it. He hadn't just bought an apartment, he'd invested in it. The same skills he'd used as a contractor had landed him a deal, one funded by my so-called fresh start money. The betrayal wasn't just personal anymore. It was financial, professional, almost calculated. And the more I looked, the clearer it became. Jenna, the woman in the photos, wasn't just some random girlfriend. She was the real estate agent for the project, his partner in business, and apparently everything else. I didn't know what I wanted to do until the next week when Emma came home with a flyer. Mom, she said excitedly, Dad's apartment is having an open house this weekend. He said we could come see it if we wanted. For a moment, I just stared at her. An open house. For the place I'd unknowingly helped him build. I smiled faintly. You know what, sweetheart? I think I'll come too. She blinked. Really? Really. Saturday came bright and warm. I wore a cream blouse, simple gold earrings, nothing flashy, just enough to remind myself I still had dignity. When we arrived, a lobby gleamed with polished marble and gold accents. Jenna stood near the reception desk, all smiles, her hand tucked into Ethan's hand. He froze when he saw me. Mara, I didn't expect. I know, I said calmly. Emma invited me. I thought it would be nice to see what you've been working on. Jenna's smile faltered slightly, but she recovered fast. Of course, we'd love to show you around. We toured the place. Wide hallways, tall windows, designer fixtures. It was beautiful, objectively, but all I could think about was how many sleepless nights I'd spent worrying about bills while he'd been designing his new kingdom. When we reached the model penthouse, Ethan pulled me aside. Mara, I hope you don't think... I met his gaze. Think what? That you used our divorce settlement to bankroll this? His face paled. It's not like that. Then what's it like, Ethan? Because from where I'm standing, it looks exactly like that. He rubbed the back of his neck, a nervous habit I remembered too well. Look, the money helped me get started, yes. But this is bigger than that. It's a real business now. I can finally give the kids a better life. I laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. You mean, you can live a better life. Don't pretend this was ever about the kids. Jenna shifted awkwardly beside us, but I didn't spare her a glance. My focus was on him, on the man I once trusted more than myself. I said quietly, You could have told me. You could have been honest. Instead, you let me believe you were struggling while you were posting your new life online. He sighed. Mara, I didn't want to hurt you. Then you should have thought about that before you spent what was left of my faith in you. We stood there in silence. surrounded by the gleaming perfection of his new world. It hit me then, I wasn't angry because of the money. I was angry because I'd spent years trying to fix something that was never broken. Me. The truth is, Ethan hadn't changed. He just upgraded his lies. When I left that day, I didn't slam any doors or make a scene. I walked out with my head high, my kids at my side, and a calmness I hadn't felt in a long time. He called my name as I reached the elevator. I turned once. "Good luck, Ethan," I said softly. "You'll need it." That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that apartment, the glass walls, the view of the city, the way Ethan's hand fit so casually around Jenna's waist, like it had never fit around mine. But it wasn't jealousy that kept me awake. It was something colder. Clarity. For years, I'd told myself I was the practical one, the saver, the planner, the caretaker. I had always assumed that if I was kind enough, patient enough, reasonable enough, then life would eventually reward me for it. But life doesn't work that way. Sometimes the people you sacrifice for will take everything you have and still say you didn't give enough. So I made a decision. If Ethan could build something new out of my generosity, then I could build something out of my pain. The next morning, I called my lawyer, the same one who'd handled our divorce. "Can we talk?" I said. "It's about the settlement money." He sounded cautious but kind. "Of course, Mara. Come in this afternoon." When I sat across from him later, I explained everything, how Ethan had used the funds not for personal survival, as the agreement stated, but as capital for a private development project. He listened quietly, taking notes. Then he leaned back in his chair and said, "Technically, you can file a motion for breach of settlement. If he used the funds in a way that contradicts the terms, you may have a case." "A case?" I asked. "You mean I could get the money back?" "Possibly," he said, "or at least some of it, but it won't be easy." I nodded slowly. Nothing worth rebuilding ever is. The weeks that followed were exhausting. Paperwork, emails, court filings, uncomfortable phone calls. Ethan tried to talk me out of it at first. "Come on, Mara," he said during one of our exchanges. "You really want to drag this through court? Think of the kids." "I am thinking of them," I said. "That's why I'm doing it. They need to see that integrity matters." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "You always have to be the moral one, don't you?" "No," I said quietly. "Just the honest one." The legal process stretched on for months. There were days I felt tired enough to quit, days when the court letters made my hands shake, but I kept going. Then one afternoon, while I was cooking dinner, a simple stew, carrots and potatoes simmering slowly, my lawyer called. "Mara, I have news. The court reviewed your claim. Ethan will be required to compensate you for misuse of settlement funds. It's not the full amount, but it's something." I closed my eyes, breathing in the steam from the pot. The scent of thyme and bay leaf filled the air, warm, grounding. "Something?" I repeated. "That's enough." The following weekend, Ethan came by to pick up the kids. He looked older somehow, the confident shine gone, the easy charm dulled. "So," he said, avoiding my eyes, "I guess you won?" I shook my head. "This wasn't about winning, Ethan. It was about fairness." He gave a short, bitter laugh. "Fairness. You always believed in that fairy tale." I met his gaze steadily. "Maybe, but at least I still believe in something." He didn't respond. He just nodded, called for the kids, and walked away. That was the last real conversation we ever had. After that, I focused on rebuilding my own life, not just financially, but emotionally. I took on more freelance design work, something I'd always loved but never had time for. I repainted the kitchen myself, turned the small spare room into a studio. For the first time in years, I felt proud, not because someone told me to be, but because I'd earned it. One evening, as I watched the sunset from my small porch, Emma sat beside me. She was 14 by then, tall, curious, wiser than her age. "Mom," she said quietly, "I saw Dad's apartment online. It looks different now, like he's not there anymore." I turned to her, surprised. "He moved out?" She nodded. "Jenna left. Something about money problems?" I said nothing for a moment, watching the orange sky fade to violet. "Sometimes," I said softly, "people build castles on sand. They look solid, but the first wave always tells the truth." Emma leaned her head against my shoulder. "You're not mad anymore, are you?" I smiled faintly. "No. Anger's heavy. I've carried enough." Months passed, and life began to feel lighter. The court settlement helped stabilize things, but more than that, I'd found peace in simplicity. Every Friday, I lit a candle in the kitchen, a small ritual I started for myself. I'd whisper, "You're still standing." Because sometimes that's all the victory you need. Then one evening, as I was closing my laptop after a long day of work, I got an email. Subject line, "Project Inquiry, Design Consultation." The sender's name made me blank. Jenna Michaels. Curiosity prickled through me. I opened it. "Hi, Mara. I know this might be unexpected, but I've been following your work online. I didn't realize how talented you are until recently. I'm starting over and need help redesigning a small apartment. Would you be interested in taking the project?" I sat there for a long while, staring at the message. Part of me wanted to delete it, to close that door forever. But another part of me, the part that had learned to forgive without forgetting, understood something deeper. She wasn't asking for redemption. She was asking for help. And maybe that was the universe's way of testing whether my healing was real. I took a slow breath, then typed a short reply. "Hi, Mara. Thank you for reaching out. I can help. Let's start with a consultation next week." I hit send before I could overthink it. It wasn't about her anymore. It was about me and the woman I'd become. When I met Jenna again, I almost didn't recognize her. She wasn't the polished woman from those glossy apartment photos. The hair that once fell in perfect waves now hung limp and uneven. Her makeup was barely there. She looked smaller somehow, not just physically, but in spirit. We met at a little cafe downtown, the kind that smelled like roasted coffee and burnt sugar. She arrived 10 minutes early, waiting with her hands clasped around a mug that had gone cold. "Mara," she said, standing when she saw me, "thank you for coming." I nodded politely. "Of course." She gave a small, nervous laugh. "I wasn't sure you'd say yes. After everything." I slid into the chair across from her. "I almost didn't." She looked down at her hands. "That's fair." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The cafe was quiet except for the soft clink of spoons and the hum of an espresso machine. Finally, she said, "Ethan's gone. He left when the money ran out, said I was bad luck." I stared at her, searching her face for any trace of the woman who'd smiled beside my ex-husband in those photos. But all I saw was someone broken. Not by me, not even by Ethan, but by the consequences of her own choices. "I'm sorry," she murmured, "for what I did, for helping him spend your money like that." I knew where it came from, Mara, and I looked away. I told myself it wasn't my business, but it was. It was your life. I sat back, letting the weight of her words hang between us. For years, I had dreamed of this moment, of hearing her admit what she'd done. I thought it would make me feel powerful, vindicated, but instead, all I felt was a deep, quiet sadness. Because she was right. It had been my life. But not anymore. I said softly, "It's not about the money. It's about the way people forget that trust is a currency too. And once it's spent, you can't earn it back with apologies." She nodded, tears forming at the edges of her eyes. "I understand. I really do." We talked for nearly an hour about the project, about design details, about neutral colors and small spaces. The conversation flowed easily once we stopped dancing around the past. When it was time to leave, she said quietly, "Thank you for giving me a chance." I smiled faintly. Everyone deserves one, just not always a second. Working with Jenna was strange at first, almost surreal. Each meeting felt like walking through old ashes, careful not to stir them too much. But as the weeks passed, something unexpected happened. We found a rhythm, professional, respectful, and little by little, the bitterness that once poisoned every thought of her began to fade. One afternoon, while we were reviewing samples in her new apartment, a small, sunlit one-bedroom, she turned to me and said, "You know, Ethan told me once that you'd never survive without him." I laughed quietly. He told me the same thing about himself. We both smiled, but there was a sadness underneath it, a shared understanding of how small his world had really been. "Funny," I said. "He thought he was the sun, but all he ever did was cast shadows." When the project ended, Jenna handed me a final payment in a neat envelope. "It's not much, but I wanted to pay in full. No shortcuts this time." I nodded, accepting it. "Thank you. I appreciate that." As I turned to leave, she said, "You really did rebuild your life, didn't you?" I paused at the door. "Yes," I said, "but not the same one, a better one." By then, nearly 2 years had passed since the divorce. Life had settled into something peaceful. The kids were thriving. Emma had started a photography club, and Ben had joined the debate team. I was still living in that little house, the one I thought I'd never get used to. But now it felt like mine. Every creak in the floor, every mismatched chair, every imperfect corner. Some evenings I'd sit on the porch with a cup of tea and watch the lights of the city flicker in the distance. I'd think about how strange life was, how people could break you and still somehow lead you to exactly where you were meant to be. One night, while scrolling through my phone, I saw something that made me pause. A real estate listing. A familiar building, though the name had changed. The luxury apartment Ethan built with my money was now up for sale. The price had dropped significantly. Underneath the photo, the description read, "Recently vacated. Motivated seller. Needs work." I let out a quiet breath. Not quite a laugh, not quite a sigh. It felt poetic in a way, his empire crumbling quietly, while my life, once in pieces, stood firm. Months later, I was invited to speak at a local community event about women rebuilding after divorce. At first, I hesitated. I wasn't a speaker. I didn't like the spotlight. But something inside me said yes. When I stood at the small podium that evening, facing a crowd of women, some young, some older, all carrying stories of their own, I told mine. I didn't talk about revenge or bitterness. I talked about letting go, about starting over, about how dignity doesn't disappear just because someone disrespected you. I ended with this. Sometimes losing what you thought you needed is the only way to find what you really deserve. The room was silent for a moment, then filled with quiet applause. And for the first time in a long time, I felt whole. A few weeks after that event, I received an envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a check, small but unexpected, and a note, written in careful handwriting. For what I took without asking, I'm trying to make things right. Jenna. I stared at it for a long moment, then smiled. Forgiveness, I realized, doesn't mean forgetting what happened. It means releasing the power it has over you. And in that moment, I felt lighter, not because of the money, but because the story was finally over. I didn't rebuild my life to prove Ethan wrong. I rebuilt it to remind myself that loss doesn't define you. What you do afterwards does. Every scar, every lesson, every heartbreak, they all led me here. To peace, to strength, to freedom. And if I could speak to the woman I was back then, the one who gave him a second chance and lost everything, I'd tell her this: you didn't fail. You just finished one chapter so you could start the one that finally belongs to you.